Now 3 days ago I released a video on whether we should leave our heating on 24/7 or not, and it's done quite well. It's actually had over 100,000 views. Just amazing. But the comments made me think. First of all, some people are very rude, aren't they? Others, pretty obvious with the comments that they only watch the first couple of minutes and then put a rubbish comment. And then other comments, people don't really get what I'm talking about. And I've even had a guy claiming to be a gas safe inspector in London reporting me to YouTube for giving false information, and he was demanding I take the video down. Now, with this video, hopefully I'm going to put it to bed and explain exactly how radiators work and why your house is probably cold or even too hot because you're doing all the wrong things. Now, I also want to get it across right from the get-go that there's going to be a lot of technical information in this video. So if you have the attention span of a goldfish, then maybe this isn't the video for you. Also, a lot of this information might not even be relevant for you or your property, especially if you've got things like electric heating. But let's get on with it and find out exactly what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong with our central heating systems powered by gas. So we can heat our home in 3 ways. We've got convection, we've got conduction, and we've got radiation. Now we'll talk about convection and conduction later, so let's have a look at radiation first. Now, radiation actually means to send out or spread from one heat central location. Now, the most obvious way of radiation there is the sun, and how the sun heats our planet. And the sun can also heat your home. This is called solar gain, and this can come through your windows and actually warm your house up. So in the part of the video I say when you're not getting any solar gain, no matter whether it's in the day or at the night, so the front or the back of the house or the side out, whatever, close your curtains or put blinds down to keep the heat in. So how does the sun actually heat the planet? It's a miracle, really. Now the sun is 93 million miles away, or 150 million kilometers away from the Earth. And if it was any closer, it'd melt us. And if it's any further away, we'd freeze to death. So it's a bit of a miracle. Also, it takes the heat from the sun about 8 1/3 minutes to get to us. Now this radiation, when it's travelling down to the planet, comes in quite a few forms. It comes in visible light, it comes in ultraviolet light, it comes in infrared, also comes as X-ray, and also comes as gamma rays. And did you know it's the ultraviolet rays are the ones that gives us our nice suntan? Or in my case, the redness and the blistering. Now the heat is travelling through a vacuum. So when it's travelling through this vacuum, it's not heating the space around it. It will only heat anything it touches. And this is why spacemen and space women have to wear special suits to keep them cool in the sun and warm when they're out of the sun. So solar radiation won't heat anything up unless it actually touches it. So when it's travelled this 93 million miles and it gets to the surface of the Earth, it does 2 things. The first one is about 70% of it is absorbed by the sea and the ground. Then there's 30% of it gets deflected back out into space. Now, what keeps that heat into the planet, which we should all know now, is the greenhouse gases. And the main one we talk about when we talk about greenhouse gas is carbon dioxide, or CO2. Now, there is 0.04% of the greenhouse gas layer which is CO2, or 400, or around about 421 parts per million. So not a lot of CO2 in the air at all. And that's another argument where you could get in is CO2 driving climate change. Anyway, now the surface of the planet will actually absorb 1,360 watts per square metre. So quite a bit of energy. And then that energy, what's in the ground, by the aid of conduction, will heat the air on this planet. And then that heat will move around the planet by the aid of convection. So this heat, what we get from the sun, can be amazing, but also it can cause us problems. And this is where our thermostatic radiator valves come in. So if you've got a room with the sun come streaming in, it's November, December time, and the warmth from that sun can then start to heat the room more than is required. So instead of wasting that solar gain, your thermostatic radiator valve will stop the heat going into the radiator, which will then come out into the room. Now, what setting do we set the thermostatic radiator valve to? Well, that is dependent upon the manufacturer. So this is a Drayton one, and this goes from 0, which is off, all the way up to 6, which is permanently on. 6 could even be 30, 35 degrees. It depends on the manufacturer. So you definitely wouldn't be putting it on 6 unless you've got your walk-around thermostat. So if you do have a walk-around thermostat, whichever room you're in with that thermostat, set it to 6, because then it will be your thermostat controlling the heating in that room, not your thermostatic radiator valve. And if you turn it all the way to 0, it's off. But if you turn it to the frost setting, which this one has, then that means it will just protect your room from going lower than 5 degrees. Hopefully that helps. So let's have a look now and see how radiators actually work. So here we have a little house, and this is a radiator. Now, first of all, let's get this right. So if I ask you the question, what does a radiator do? Now, your answer will probably be to heat the room. But that's not what a radiator is there to do. A radiator is there to replace the heat loss. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you take a room, if the room is going direct to outside, it will lose heat. If you've got a loft above, it will lose heat. And if you've got no insulation in your floor, it will lose heat that way as well. So if the area next to it, above it or below it is colder than what you want the room, then you're going to have heat loss. Now, dependent upon how thick your insulation is, so the minimum thickness for part L is 270 mil in the loft, most is around about 300, and then obviously you've got insulation in your wall and cavity wall if you're lucky enough to have a house built with that kind of stuff. Where I live, we've got nothing in our cavity. So depending on what your walls are structured of, what the U values are, will be dependent upon how big you have to make this radiator. So the radiator is there to combat the heat loss from the room, not just to heat the room. Now, next thing, why is a radiator called a radiator when it only radiates out about 10% of its heat? It should actually be called a convector, because it convects the heat around the room, not radiates it. So what is convection? It is the movement of particles through a substance transporting their heat energy from one hotter area to cooler areas. Now, this little 10% it radiates out from the front, it also radiates out from the back. And the brackets, which are attached to the wall, also conduct heat through there. So we're losing heat through the bracket through the wall. And we're also losing the heat through the wall. So that's why some people on outside walls put that silver foil stuff around the back of the radiator, then to radiate the heat back into the room. So if you're stood right in front of a radiator and you stick your hands out, are you going to feel any heat? No, but if you go right up to it and you touch it, you'll feel the heat. Or if you put your hand over the top of the radiator, you will feel the heat. Now you know how radiators work. Don't put wet clothes and wet towels on radiators to dry, and don't really have a shelf or a radiator cover on them, because you've got to heat the radiator shelf or the radiator cover then to make them work, and then you're also stopping convection. Some people say put a shelf over it because it'll deflect it out a little bit. Well, it will, but it'll still go upwards. So leave them. Don't put furniture in front of them. And definitely, if you've got long curtains, don't cover the thermostatic radiator valve with the curtains, because it'll stop it working. So I better take this off then, haven't I? So if this radiator is designed to combat actually heat loss, how big does the radiator need to be? Well, that can be quite a long, drawn out, complicated process of sizing radiators. Now, another comment which I've been laughed at on quite a few social media videos is me having a flow temperature at home of 55 degrees. Now, I've done a video, I will leave a link down in the description below, on whether your radiators are big enough to be able to have a lower flow temperature. Now, the lower the flow temperature, the more energy you're going to save. Seems to be a bit controversial, but it isn't. But sizing the radiator is key for your heat loss and your flow temperature. Because if you have a lower flow temperature, you need a bigger radiator to combat that heat loss. So if you've got a high flow temperature, 80 degrees, you might need a radiator what's a metre long. But if you need a flow temperature of 40 degrees, then you might need a 2 metre long radiator. That's kind of how it works. Now, radiators come in all different sizes. And they also come in all different kind of thicknesses. So we have radiators which are just single panel. We have radiators which are double panel. And we've also got radiators now which are triple panelled. Now, we've worked out that these should be called convectors. So on the back of the radiators there is also convectors. They're like little chimneys. And again, you can get single convectors, you can get double convectors, or you can get triple convectors. And these will all cut down in the size of the radiator to allow you to be able to fit it into your house. So, I have worked out that there is only one radiator in my house which will not sustain a low flow temperature of 55 degrees. And that's my bedroom radiator. And I don't want it hot there anyway, so it's perfect for our needs. So, depending on what your heat loss is, will depend on how big your radiator is, and depending on your flow temperature, will also depend on the size of your radiator. Now, the reasons why I have chosen 55 degrees centigrade for my flow temperature is, number one, That is the lowest flow temperature I could get with the radiators I'd already had installed. So if I wanted to get a lower flow temperature than that, I would have to replace the radiators, and that would become inefficient. And then number two, condensing boilers will only condense if the return temperature is less than 55 degrees. So if you've set your flow temperature to 55 degrees, your return temperature has to be lower than 55 degrees, or at least 55 degrees, so it will always be in condensing mode, because anything higher than 55 degrees on the return temperature on a condensing boiler, it will turn it into a standard efficiency boiler. So running at a flow rate of 55 degrees will make the boiler a lot more efficient. It will make it run less, so putting less strain on the boiler and making the boiler last longer. So that's why I chose a flow temperature of 55 degrees. Now again, I've done a video all about this called Don't Adjust Your Flow Temperatures on your boiler until you've watched this video. So I will leave a link in the description below so you can watch that one after you've watched this, or you've watched it, anyway, you can watch that video. So that's sizing the radiators and the flow temperatures, but how do these radiators actually work? The cold, heavy, dense air will be at the bottom of the room, because they say heat rises. Well, it does, because it gets displaced by the cold air from the bottom, and that's what makes it work. So the coldest part of your room is going to be the floor. So my first bit of advice would be, if you sat there in the winter, freezing cold, and you're watching TV, lift your legs off the floor. Because if your feet feel cold, your head's going to feel cold, so you're going to feel cold. So, slippers on, socks on, keep your feet off the floor, because that's where the coldest part is. This is why in winter, your dog always wants to sit on the sofa, but in summer it wants to lie on the floor. And then you got cats when they go on the top of your furniture in winter, and then you don't see them in summer. Now this room temperature is another common comment I've been getting on the videos. People saying, 15 degrees, really? What's wrong with 15 degrees as a setback temperature? Not allowing my house to go lower than 15 degrees when I'm in bed or when I'm not in the house. Why is that a problem? And the actual temperature of the room, there's been comments where they've been saying, oh, my house has to be 23 degrees. Why? Why does it have to be 23 degrees? What do we do in summer when our house is 23 degrees? We want aircon on to cool it down. There's no need for your house to be 23 degrees. Now you can say, it's my house, I can do whatever I want. Well, why are you watching a video about saving energy and heating your house properly? Comfort temperature, according to the Energy Saving Trust and all the building regs, is 18 to 20 degrees. Now they say don't allow the house to go lower than 18 degrees if you've got a pensioner in there. When does hypothermia kick in? Now, hypothermia is when your body temperature drops by 2 degrees. So basically from 37 to 35 degrees. So we don't want that happening. Now for the old people, they feel the cold a lot more, and they don't really want their house going lower than 18 degrees. That's fine. I'm not saying drop it to 15 degrees. I'm saying what suits you. So if you're an elderly person, really you don't want your house going below 18 degrees, but there's no need for your house to go higher than 20 degrees in the winter months. So then you've got that band 18 to 20. But some elderly people might be okay with 19 degrees. It depends on the individual situation. Now the major problem that the elderly have is that they have to run their heating system for longer. So a room stat is key for the elderly, along with the thermostatic radiator valves and keeping warm, and this is why the government gives them the winter fuel allowance. Oh no, hang on. No. For me, I'm quite happy for my house to go down no lower than 15 degrees at night, or when I'm not in the house, and I don't want the house going over 19 degrees, so that's what I prefer. So that's the room temperature. I'm not saying drop it to 15, I'm saying drop it to whatever you feel comfortable with when you're not in the house, because why would you heat a house when you're not in it to 20 degrees, 22 degrees, 25 degrees? Why? You're just wasting energy. Anyway, this cold air comes underneath the radiator. It then passes at the back of the radiator, warm it up, and it then convects around the room. So it kind of goes in layers. So we put our thermostat 1.5 meters off the floor, which is about your head height while you sat down, because if your head's feeling warm and your feet are feeling warm, you're going to be warm. But the way convection works, the hottest part of your room is actually at the ceiling. So we've got a log burner and we have a little fan on the log burner. So when the log burner's working, the heat will be then pushed out by the little fan. So you could actually do the same thing in your roof. And they used to be quite popular, didn't they, in the early 2000s, paddle fans in ceilings. You don't seem to see them anymore. But this is where your insulation is key if you're like us, living in a bungalow, because we don't want any heat then going into the loft quickly. So the insulation is there to slow it down. It will never stop it, but it will slow down that heat loss. Now this picture of a roof is a great example of how insulation works. So on the right side of the house, which is the old side of the house, you can see most of the frost is going, but on the left side it's still there. So it shows the difference in probably thickness and type of insulation used in the extension to the old part of the house. Now this room stat is set to a height of 1.5 meters off the ground, but just bear in mind, if you have a walk around room stat, where you actually put it. Now, if you do have a walk around stat, don't go putting it in places like on windowsills, don't go stick it on top of radiators. Just think that whatever that room stat is, that's what's going to be sensing your temperature in the room. And if you've got it low down, then obviously it's going to need more heat to come down to knock out the stat. So this 1.5 meters is quite important. Now, have you noticed that room ceiling heights have reduced over the years? Now, I'm in a Victorian building here, and we've got nearly 12-foot ceilings in some parts of it. But if you go into a new build today, you're lucky if you get 7.5 feet. And that is all because of convection. Because if they can get the convection not to go right the way up and they can get it lower, it's going to save money and it's going to save energy. Now, with new builds, we've got insulation in the ceilings, in the floors, and also in the walls. Because like I said, if the room is colder next door to where you are, that is going to have the heat drawn to it. But if we put insulation in, that will hopefully stop it. So that's why new builds are massively insulated now, so they save on the heat loss. So if you're in a newer house, then you will need less energy to actually heat it than you would do if you live in an old Victorian terraced house. Now, the same thing that happens with air also happens with water, but this time we call it stratification. Now, stratification is the process by which hot water in a cylinder separates into layers. So that means we have the cold cold water at the bottom and the hot water at the top. Now, I had a comment from a guy claiming to be a gas safe inspector in the southwest of London, saying my last video, the one what this is all about, I gave people the wrong information about flow temperatures. Now, he says he's reported me to YouTube for giving false information. Now, I was talking about a combi boiler that I had at home. So, can I stress this right from the very beginning? This is a cylinder full of water which we turn into hot water. Now, there is a chance you could get Legionella in a cylinder if you've got low water temperatures in there. So, Legionella is dormant below 20 degrees centigrade and over 50 degrees centigrade, it then becomes dormant again, and over 60 degrees you kill it. So, if we have a low flow temperature here, that means we're going to have a low water temperature. Now, according to the building regulations and the water regulations, the hot water coming out of there, if it's over 48 degrees, could actually hurt somebody. Old people, young people, could burn them. But we still need to store the water in the cylinder between 60 and 65 degrees. It depends where you are in the country, depends on whether you have 60 or 65 degrees. So, if you do have a low flow temperature coming into here, so you have something like a heat pump, then there will be an immersion heater in this cylinder which will kick in automatically once a week to kind of take the water over 60 degrees to kill any Legionella. But if you're constantly using the water, that reduces the risk of Legionella. It's only if you leave it for quite a long time going hot, cold, then Legionella will go. So, can't get this over more or stress this more. If you have a cylinder, your boiler flow temperature, whether it's a heat only boiler or a system boiler, should not be lower than 60 degrees. But if you have a combi boiler, your flow temperature going to your radiators can be as low as you want, as long as you have the correct chemicals in the system which will protect engineers from Legionella in the future. Hopefully that clears it up about the difference in flow temperatures to whether you have a cylinder or to whether you have a combi boiler. Now let's check and see exactly how this cylinder works then. So we've got 10 degrees water coming into the cylinder. It's then heated by your boiler or your heat pump or an electric immersion heater, and then it starts to heat up as it's going through. So you start with 10 degrees there and you end up with 60 degrees coming out of your cylinder. And if you want to get that water temperature then down to 48 degrees, then near the wash basin you could use a blending valve, or you can get specially thermostatic taps. But in the UK, it's only law to have thermostatic blending valves on baths, because if you've got a kitchen sink, you might need the water to be a bit hotter to kill the bacterias, and running your hand under hot water, you'll pull it away, but submerging yourself in hot water could give you some serious burns. But for the hot water on a combi, all you got to do is turn the dial down on the front of the boiler, because then the boiler will sort out the temperature. So that's hot water. Now let's have a look at what I think is very much underrated and should be in every new build. That's underfloor heating. Now I have done a full in-depth video on underfloor heating, so if you want to watch that video after this one, I will leave a link in the description below. So, why underfloor heating? Well, my personal opinion on it is Because we have low flow temperatures, it saves us money. Now the reason why we have low flow temperatures in the pipework here is because if you heat the floor too much, you're not going to be able to walk on it. Now the average temperature of the floors is around about 30 degrees. Again, when we're at this 1.5 meters with the stat, we're at 20 degrees, and then when we're at the ceiling, we're down to 15 degrees. So it works the opposite way from the radiators, where the radiators being the hotter at the top and the coldest at the bottom. So pets love underfloor heating. Now, to stop any of the heat going back into the ground, or to reduce the amount of heat going back into the ground, then we need insulation in the subfloor of the property. But like I say, I've done a full in-depth video and there's loads of different types. If you can put underfloor heating on top of your floorboards, you can do loads of stuff. There's loads of different ones, so check that video out. But for me, because this already has low flow temperatures coming in there, it's the perfect way of saving energy. Also, your floor becomes the full radiator. So there are no unsightly radiators on the wall. Your full floor becomes it. Now, how does it give off this heat? Well, it doesn't give it off by convection, because convection has to be replaced by cold. You know, you could say there's a very little bit. If you've got cold air blasted across the floor itself, it'll aid it to go around the room. But mainly, it's conduction. So what the underfloor does is it heats your furniture, and then your furniture then gives off the heat. So technically everything could be done under conduction, but then if there's no heating there, then it could be in radiation, because if you put your hand low down on the floor, you might actually feel that heat coming up. It's unlikely, but you could do. So for me, if I was to redesign my house, I would be putting underfloor heating in, because in my opinion, it's the most efficient way of heating a home, and it looks the best as well, because like I said, your floor becomes a gigantic radiator. Now, probably the major problem with underfloor heating is its actual controllability, if that's the word. Anyway, turning it on and off and controlling the heat, because it's such a big surface area. And also, if you've got a screed slab there, that will also hold a lot of heat in, and then it will actually conduct it out of the floor. Now, it does take a bit of getting used to, because the floor can take a while to heat up as well, and also a while to cool down. And if you've got, again, springtime, autumn time, when the sun comes in and you get that extra heat from that sun, so that solar heat is going to mess up your room. And it's important that you have stats. Now, with underfloor heating, every room is controlled mainly by its own stat, unless you've got a massive floor area and you can use one room stat to do a huge, if you got open plan downstairs. But that was probably my only downside for underfloor, besides the cost, is it being able to control that heat and getting used to it. But once you get used to it, you'd never go back. Now, hopefully you're still with me and we can have a bit of a recap. So the information I've been giving you over this video and all the other videos I've done, I'm sure you will find one shoe doesn't fit all. Now, what's good for me might not be good for your home and might cost you more money. You might have a poorly insulated home, which will cost you more money. But don't forget, every little helps. Now, also don't forget that gas appliances require servicing every year. So if you haven't had your gas boiler serviced for a few years, you'll need to get it serviced, because it can also find massive problems. Whether you've got poor circulation, whether you've got blocked systems, all these things will cost you money. So don't think just because the gas engineer's going to charge you a few quid to go and do it, it's wasted money. If you've got a decent gas engineer, it will not be wasted money. But to answer the question, is leaving my heating on 24/7 going to save me money? As you've found out, it's not a definitive answer. I never turn my heating off via the time clock. I use my thermostat to do it, and I have set back temperatures for at night time and when I'm not in the house. Because like I've said, no need to heat an empty house. But we still need to protect it, and we also don't want it to go too low because it'll use more energy getting it back up. So I bet there's only a few of you will actually have listened to that little statement. So that's my look at how we can save energy and reacting to some of the comments what have been put on my last video a couple of days ago. So hopefully you've liked this video, and I'll catch you on the next one. Cheers.